Okay, so who am I? I am from Las Vegas. I'm originally from the Midwest and didn't like the humidity, so moved to Las Vegas. I'm the mother of 2 boys in their mid-20s who do not allow me to take pictures of them anymore. And I'm the mother of 2 Chihuahuas, as you can see, and they let me take pictures of them all the time. My passion is actually baking. So if I'm not doing FileMaker, that's what I'm doing. My husband and I both like to ride motorcycles, and in the Midwest, the only pictures we got were of corn stalks, and now we get pictures like this when we go riding. But what qualifies me to speak? Well, I'm not sure if FileMaker picked me. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully I will live up to their expectations. I've been working with the FileMaker platform for over 27 years. And I spoke at DevCon in 2007 about this very same topic. And this is my 14th DevCon, so I've been to sessions and I'm a little familiar with them. And I use this process that I'm going to talk about all the time with my projects. So hopefully this will help you as well. So today we're going to talk about a few things: storyboarding, ways and why, estimating, a process that I use, ongoing management that you can use because you've storyboarded and you've estimated. I do have a demo tool, and then if there's time, we'll do an exercise. Shoot! Everybody, come on! No, I'm just kidding. So let's get started with ways to storyboard. So the idea is that there's no one way to do it. When it comes to estimating, it's not an exact science, and you have to do what you feel comfortable with and what's going to make you efficient. So a few things I'm going to mention. I haven't used all of these ways to storyboard, but they are things that I've heard from FileMaker developers over the years, so I know that they're all good processes. One of them is obviously FileMaker Pro. You can build a storyboard in FileMaker Pro. It doesn't have functionality. It's just the design and the flow of the project. Another one is Balsamic. This one actually you draw out this, the squares and the screens, but it looks pretty similar to FileMaker in that you could have square buttons and rounded buttons and things like that. And I'm not going to go through how to use each of these programs. You guys can go in and play with them and decide what you like best. But I will give an example later on of a storyboard that I did. Actually, I have one that's somewhat recent, and I have one that's probably from 2005 to just show you the differences, the similarities and the differences. If you're an artist and you can sketch, which I am not, there's a couple things out there. Paper by 53 is really handy, and Sketchbook by Autodesk is nice because it's actually free if you get just the base version, and it has advanced techniques that if you want to pay for it, you can. And the other thing you can do is just paper and pen. Probably not as much now as back in 2005, which is one of my storyboards, is actually paper and pen. But there are options. I know people who have used graph paper. I know people who have used index cards when they're storyboarding for an iOS device. And then there's a website out there called printablepaper.net. The image here you see is actually from there. They've got all kinds of paper that I think it was actually meant for teachers. And you can go and actually print out paper. And, or because it's a PDF, you can actually build it electronically, but as if you're on paper. So that one was really, is also really handy. Again, whatever you're comfortable with. So those are ways to storyboard. Why do we storyboard? Well, we storyboard to make sure that you and your client are on the same page. It's a nice visual blueprint of what you're going to build for them when you actually deliver a project. It's easier, when you storyboard, it's easier to manage in the future. And what happens is the client has to be comfortable knowing that you heard what they had to say, and the storyboard is going to actually show that to them, that you listened to what they had to say and you heard it, and you're going to visually show it to them. This is before you do any coding, and the storyboard is actually going to help you break down the estimate later, which we'll talk about. If you deliver to the client what you showed them on paper, they're going to be happy. And if you have a happy client, you're going to be a happy developer. So it's kind of, comes full circle. And it's a lot easier to put something down on paper and kind of figure it out in your mind than to just say, how hard can it be, right? Which I've heard quite a few times. So what does this matter to the client? Why should they care if you storyboard? Well, a storyboard typically isn't free. You do invest a lot of time in it, in putting together an analysis of their needs, and it's going to make you efficient. You're going to work things out on paper before you start coding. It's going to make you productive. How many of you out there have started to build something in FileMaker and then stopped and said, maybe this isn't going to be, the performance isn't going to be where I wanted it. Maybe this doesn't flow as smoothly as I wanted for the user experience, and then gone back and taken it apart and rebuilt again? Yep, I think a lot of us do that. So hopefully with the storyboard, you kind of work through all of that before you start coding. And it makes you effective. You're actually producing for the client what they intended to see when they get their final result. So estimating is not easy. I see some familiar faces here. They're here for a refresher course. They've heard me talk about this for many years. It's just not an exact science. And if you think about it, you could have a project, say with a dental office, and it could go really well. And then next year you could be called by another dentist. And they could be two completely different projects because everybody has their own business process, which is why we do custom development. But it's not like just because you did it once, you can just repeat it again. Everything's new. And so you have to kind of evaluate what you're doing and learn from it, but it's probably never going to be something that you're going to do perfectly every time. So hopefully, Matt Odell did a session yesterday what was the name of it? Oh, prototyping? Okay. That probably goes hand in hand with what I'm talking about today. So if you didn't get to see his session, make sure you look those up on the slides on the FileMaker website, because I think any bit helps. But the thing with estimating is there's two parts to it. There's the discovery, and then there's the creating of the recipe, of building the estimate and how much it's going to cost. And the nice thing about storyboarding, well, first of all, the storyboarding is going to help you create that estimate. But the nice thing about breaking it down is that as you're working on the project and when you're done with the project, you can kind of compare and you can evaluate, how did I do on this? Was I within budget? Was I over budget? And you could figure out why. Maybe you spent a lot more time on this part of it than you thought you would. And so next time, if you have something similar, you can keep that in mind and maybe budget a little bit more. Maybe this thing over here took half the time. And so it helps you become a little bit more accurate. So let's talk about the discovery. There's three parts to the discovery. The first is the initial questions. So these are things that you're going to just gather from listening to your client, or from explicitly asking them. I'm just listing a few of them here, and we'll talk about why these questions are important. And then I actually have a white paper that's on the FileMaker website that lists a bunch more questions. But the first one is platforms. Back in, FileMaker 6, we just had basically Mac and Windows. And even then you had to worry about doing something cross-platform because an Arial 12 point on a Mac is different than an Arial 12 point on a PC. So if anybody here worked way back in FileMaker 6, do you remember taking something off a Mac and putting it on a PC and how different everything looked? But now we have, what do we have? We have WebDirect, we have iOS, so we have all these different platforms, and we have to think about what are we going to do? Our layouts on our iOS devices aren't going to be the same as our layouts for our desktops or WebDirect. So that's going to take a little bit more time to develop all those. On the iOS device, are we going to do landscape and portrait, or just one or the other? So these are all things that we have to kind of think about. So like I said, as you're talking to the client, a lot of these things you're going to learn just by listening to what they have to say. Security requirements. This isn't, am I going to have 20 privilege sets? Setting those up, that's easy, right? It's testing of 20 privilege sets, because you want to make sure you deliver that this person can't do what they're not supposed to be able to do, and this person can do what they are supposed to be able to do. The other thing is sometimes we build security into the scripts. So you have to think of everything, and how am I going to restrict this person from going here or there? It might be a combination of things. Resolution. Oh, nope, my notes are different than my screen. Intended use. Output. So is this just going to be a data holder, or are they going to export lists into Excel? That's pretty easy. What if they're going to connect to Tableau? Or what if they're going to have these really complicated subsummary reports? These are the things that you need to know. What do you want to gain from, other than just data entering? What do you want to get out from it? And these are the things you have to know and evaluate in order to figure out how much time it's going to take. Resolution. So this is kind of a big deal, because especially now, everybody's screens are all differently sized. And like right now, if I were just looking at my laptop, I have a demo tool here. It doesn't even fit on here. It doesn't even squeeze down enough to fit on this screen. So you have to kind of take that into consideration when you're thinking about how am I going to build this. Because if you have someone, you want to build for the smallest screen, so that person is not having to scroll everywhere, and the larger screens can expand or do whatever. But if you build a smaller screen, well, what does that mean? Does that mean more layouts? Does that mean a tabbed interface, slide controls? All these things you have to take into consideration when you're thinking about how much time you're going to invest. Integration with other systems. Has anybody worked with a plugin or an API or anything in this room? How many of you found it easy to integrate with the plugin? Okay, see, it seems easy, right? And then you get in there and you're like, ah! So you have to think about that. And those actually probably can take more time than actual coding sometimes. Design requirements. Are they going to have you create a whole new theme for them? I'll tell you back, was it 15 they came out with the button bar, or 14? I know I'm certified and I don't remember the answer to that question. When they came out with the button bar, and when you could put the little icon right in the button, and if you didn't like it, you could just change it real easily. I mean, that made a huge difference in building an estimate, because in the past, we had to build buttons for people. And then if we had one with a plus sign and then the client was like, oh, can you use my icon instead? We had to ungroup it and regroup it, So design now is actually much quicker than it used to be, and it saves a lot of time in the estimating process. But then again, if you want to create a theme for someone now, they didn't have that before, so there's all these, pros and cons of doing things and how much time you're going to do. Data migration is kind of a huge deal. I have a client, they're a government health insurance company, and they are required to track just a god-awful amount of information. And they have all these reports that they have to send out. And they started off small, and they had probably 20, 25 different Excel spreadsheets that they were working with. So every time they changed a name, like, you know, if an employee got married, then they had to go and change it in every other Excel spreadsheet. And the data was really, really messy. Something as simple as a yes, no. They'd have a yes, a no, a Y, an N. In the birth date, they didn't have it, you know, they could type whatever they wanted, and they had typed the slash in the wrong spot. So when we brought it into FileMaker, it said that the person was born in 1909, which we assumed they wouldn't be employed if they were. And in addition, when we built the FileMaker database for them, they had a lot of validation. Several fields were required before they could move on to the next step, and they didn't have any of that in Excel. So when I brought the data in, there were blank fields, there were date fields that were wrong, birth date fields that were wrong. Some fields said yes, no, YN, and she wanted it to specifically say yes, no. So what happens with the YN data? It doesn't show. And what happens when you import data into a FileMaker database with validation? Nothing. The validation doesn't trigger. So you really need to see your client's data and then figure out who's going to clean it up and build that into the time. The other thing is when you're building, sometimes even when you're rebuilding an old FileMaker database to a new FileMaker database, because the business rules have changed, I have this one project we're working on where we have all these additional things we need to track in order to allow them to do like timelines and things like that. They had templates for these timelines. And when we brought in the data from the other project, none of these new fields had been addressed. And so none of the timelines were working. And you have to then realize, okay, well then I have to go back and I have to clean up that data. So if the client's gonna do that, great, then that's obviously not something you need to build in. But those are the initial questions. There's many more that I put in the white paper that you can look at. And after that, then you start with the evaluate and the investigate. So evaluate their existing software, whatever it is. If it's an existing FileMaker database, if it's Excel spreadsheets, any other program. Evaluate their existing documents. Have that, darn it. I don't know who that is, but they're going to hear from me after this session. Evaluate their existing documents, because that'll help you determine if they have simple documents or difficult documents. And evaluate their existing data. And then investigate. Interview the users. Listen to their story. What do they have to say? I had a project a while back that it was a rewrite of an old FileMaker database. And so they were kind of showing me their process. And I'm not exaggerating when I say they were showing me this one process where they went over here and they found something and they copied it, and then they went over here and then they pasted it, and then it gave them a list of stuff, and then they picked something and then they copied it, and then they went over here and then they pasted it, and then they went over back here, and this process they had to do multiple times. And so I built something where they basically typed in the ID, they saw their list, they clicked it, and then everything happened behind the scenes. So they didn't have to do it. And then, I mean, that one thing alone was like, oh my God, you know, I saved them so much time. So the idea is to listen to what watch what they're doing and think, you know what, I could really save them a lot of time. And why are we building FileMaker databases for people or solutions for people? Isn't it to save them time? You know, when I'm making cheesecakes, I don't want to be data entering. So I want my process to be really fast so I can go back and make those cheesecakes. Well, that goes for every business person that you come across. Their expertise is not data entering, it's something else. So watch what they're doing and listen to what they have to say, listen to what works, keep doing for them what works, try to improve for them what doesn't work, and you know, make them happy, save them some time. If you think about how much money people spend on payroll a year, and if you could save even 3% of that, for big companies, that's a lot of money to be saved at the end of the year. The other thing is when you're listening, when they say something like, you know, oh, it's just a contacts database. That's easy, right? Well, until you get in and you realize that it's a company and it's contacts, and they realize that, and then you realize that, well, contacts can be actually associated with multiple companies. So now it's not a one-to-many, it's a many-to-many. And then what happens when you edit the contact data? Do you want it to change on all the company data? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. What happens when you delete one, when you go to add one? So all these things kind of change. So never take what they're saying with a grain of salt, kind of dig deep and figure out what does that actually mean. And then that'll give you ideas on how to build your software. So after you do all the asking and listening and writing down your notes, then you're going to do your detailed requirement analysis. And that's where you're going to put together your storyboard, you're going to put together your ERD so you can tell how complex the system is going to be, and we're going to talk about that now. We're going to talk about, I'm going to show you a couple examples of storyboarding, and then how we're going to use that to break down our estimate. So the first one I have, okay, see, ugly, but it got the point across. I think this is from 2005, maybe 2006. The client actually was not very tech savvy. He wasn't going to be the one working in the database. He had employees that were going to do that, but he was the one who really wanted to kind of be in charge of the process. And so I had a stack of papers, and I sat down next to him and I put the papers in front of him, and we kind of just basically said, okay, you're going to start here, and when you click this button, it's going to take you to there. And when you click this button, it's going to take you to there. And we just kind of walked through the whole process. And in doing so, a couple things happened. One is either I didn't understand what he meant, or I did, and he was very happy about it. Or two is the client says, oh, gosh, I forgot. Right. How many times does that happen? You're in the middle of a project, and the client says, oh, man, I've forgotten. It's so important. So this actually hopefully triggers in their mind other ideas, and maybe not necessarily new ideas, maybe existing ideas that they forgot to tell you about in the first place. The other storyboard is one that I did in FileMaker, and it's just really bare bones, but the idea was the client was able to actually click buttons, and so when they clicked on this button here, it took them here. And then what happens when they say yes? It takes them here. And then when they click here, it takes them to the data entry. So the client was able to kind of click through and say, yeah, that's the flow that I want. And, oh, we're missing a step here or whatever. So this is basically, I mean, it looks pretty simple, right? I'm sure what you had might have been more complex, and it doesn't, and that's okay. Maybe it depends on the client what you want to do. And like I said, with the one client, it was perfect that I had a stack of papers, because he was, just didn't want to look at the computer. This was back when not everybody had a computer. So so that is, let's go back to, here. So that is an example of a storyboard, and what do we do with that storyboard now? We're going to create the recipe. So basically, what you're going to do is you're going to break everything down. Are they going to have custom menus, custom themes, custom functions? Are you going to train? Are you going to install for them? Everything has to be taken into consideration. So what I do, and it seems like such a kindergarten process, but what I do is I think about, okay, how many layouts am I going to need to make? Am I going to duplicate these layouts? Am I going to create them from scratch? How many scripts am I going to create? How complicated are they going to be? How many fields am I going to create? Fields in general are not a huge deal, but I had a project for a nursing department ages ago, and they were actually tracking Alzheimer's patients. And they probably had a good 1,500 fields where a patient would come in and they'd have to check off everything, and then they used all those fields for statistics and things like that. So creating 100 fields, creating 1,500 fields might take you a little bit more time. So I basically take all those things, and because I've done the storyboard, I can see how many layouts am I going to do, how many scripts am I going to do, how many functions on each layout am I going to need to do. And you put a time associated with that. So if you're creating a brand new layout, maybe it'll take me an hour. If I'm duplicating a layout, maybe it'll take me a half hour. And you add up all that time. And the other thing to keep in mind too is if you're putting together an analysis for someone else who's doing the development work, you should think about their level of development, not yours. I see a lot of people who get in trouble because they think, oh, how hard could it be? And this will take 50 hours. But then when the person who's actually doing the development gets in there and takes 100 hours, so when you're thinking about this, think in terms of who's actually doing the development. But then you think about project management. Are you going to have 3 meetings a week? Well, if you are, that's 3 hours a week until the end of the project. Are you going to only have a meeting when you reach a milestone? Maybe. So you have to think about that. And then the biggest thing for me is QA. When I build a script, I do QA at the time, of course. But I don't end it just there. I actually do QA after the fact as the project as a whole. And I think what happens a lot of times is people do build a project and they test it in the best case scenario, in the way the user is supposed to use it, but they don't test it in ways that the user isn't supposed to use it. And what happens when they click that little red X on the dialog window? So I always actually add more time for QA, and I just say, well, for every 5 hours of programming, I'm going to add another hour of QA. So when I say, I'm going to take an hour to do a script, that's including testing it, but then on top of that, I'd have an additional bit of QA. So basically, you add it all up, you come up with your time, always have a little bit of a buffer. Again, it's up to you. You could 5%, 10%, 15%, whatever. Have a little bit of a buffer, and then I add it all up. And that's my estimate. And the nice thing about the buffer is if the client does say, oh, yeah, I forgot, you have a little bit of padding in there that you can say, you know what, that's only going to be a couple hours worth of work. We can do that for you. So my last sentence here is it logical? And what I mean by that is if you have a context database and you've just done an estimate, it comes out to $20,000. Is that logical? This isn't a discussion about value-based programming or anything. That's a whole nother session. It might be worth $20,000 to your client, but I'm actually talking about from an estimating standpoint. You have to think, is it really going to take me? Is it really going to cost $20,000 or however many hours to build this estimating or this context database? And if it's not, then you have to go back and look at your process. Maybe I invested too much time in developing my layouts or my scripts, or maybe I thought this was going to be more difficult. So that's really about what I'm thinking, is thinking about your estimating process more than what it's worth to the client. So the other thing, I'm just going to go back for a second. The other thing is, when you go to a client and they ask, they tell you what they need, it's very hard most of them don't want to move forward without knowing some sort of ballpark, right? So you might have a situation where you kind of think about the whole picture and you don't necessarily break everything down, but you think in terms of, it'll be maybe somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 or something like that. So you might have a situation where you start off with the ballpark with the client so that at least they know that they're within budget, and then from there you do the breakdown. But my recommendation is to never actually start the project until you do this whole breakdown and you actually come up with a number. What if you do this breakdown and you thought it would be 20 to 30,000 and it ends up being a lot more? So the other thing is, when I'm doing the breakdown, I do the Mercedes. I put in everything the client wants, all the bells and whistles, all the comforts, and then, that's way more than they wanted to spend. And then I go and I make it a Toyota Yaris. Hey, they're both good cars. I don't know anything about either car. I don't drive a Mercedes and I don't drive a Yaris. The idea is that they're both good cars, they're both reliable, but one just has a lot more bells and whistles. So I always start with, the client tells me their druthers, I throw them all in there, and then at that point, then I have to decide. Because maybe you do want to present everything to them and say, hey, let's break it out into phases. Let's start with this one and then move on to this one. I actually did that with my health insurance client. They had no idea what FileMaker was. They went into the Apple store, and the Apple store said, you guys really need FileMaker. And even after going and talking with them and showing them databases, they were just like, I don't know what FileMaker is. So with them, we actually started with this, let's start with the most important piece so you can see how much it benefits your company. And that project is still going strong a year and a half later. So we're like on phase 5 now. So the idea is that you can throw it all in there and then let the client decide what's the most important part to start with. Okay, and then how does that help with ongoing project management? Well, you've got a visual. This is what I'm going to deliver to you. If the client comes back and says, I really needed to do this and it's an additional 30 hours, you basically can defend the estimate getting higher, or maybe, hey, what's more important? We can pull this part out of it and put this part in there or whatever. You have the paperwork to back you up. And, it's not about being a jerk to the client and, no, this is it. We said this is what we're going to do. It's about making everybody happy. You want to have just as good of experience as they do. And, but the visual part of it actually helps in determining what parts you can massage if they decide something becomes more important than something else. And I actually had a project where it started off as one thing, and then something happened legally for them, and it changed into something completely different. And we had already done the storyboard and everything, so that we said, okay, great, we'll still use that when we get to do that part of it, but we need to switch gears. And that's kind of they knew it was completely different, so there was no argument there, but the visual part of it helps you realize that that's not going to fit in the budget. The other thing about going through all of this, as I said earlier, is you can gather metrics. I actually have a tool that I use. I have a really, really, really stripped down version that I'm sharing with all of you guys. But it breaks down all of my pieces just like I told you I do. And then it actually tracks my hours based on what I actually invoiced. And so I can compare and I can see how many projects am I within budget, how many have I been over. I actually haven't been over on a project in a long time, but part of that is because I'm really conservative, so I pad the estimate. I never want to go back to anyone and say, oh, it's going to be a little bit more expensive than we thought. But it's nice because you can compare those metrics and see how you're doing, and then learn from it and adjust the next time. Okay, so I'm going to show you the estimating tool that I did. To be honest, I didn't build this. I have someone that I'm training, and I told him what I wanted, and I had him build it. But it's, like I said, it's based off of a tool that I use now that has a whole bunch more stuff in it. But the idea is, I'll have to sit down here. The idea is that, oh, and I don't know, how many of you watch Game of Thrones? Okay, no spoilers, because I'm a latecomer. I did not think it was a show that I was going to enjoy, and I am just about to start season 6. So as you can see, I enjoy it very much because all of my people in here are Game of Thrones characters. So the idea is that you have a client, and you have all your clients' projects, and you go to a project, and now you can break down the project. And in this file, you can type in the budget, and you can type in the actual cost. In mine, the actual cost calculates based off of my invoices. But the estimate here is not an enterable field, and that's because we're going to build that estimate in the modules. But it takes into consideration all the extra things, custom menus, custom things, whatever. You add whatever time amount you want. You can put your little buffer in here, and then you go to your modules. And these are somewhat creative. Yours are probably going to be companies, contacts, invoices, inventory, whatever. And the idea is that you break down each module. So you've got your fields, your scripts, your layouts, and then a storyboard. And for the sake of ease, I just threw in that I had a calculation, and I had 20 of them, and they were a half hour each, whatever. So pretty intuitive, right? So just threw all that in there. And as you start entering this information in, it starts calculating the time based on your rate that you have in the front. Do the same thing with scripts, break them down. Do the same thing with layouts. And in layouts, we have a new or a duplicate, because you can, and I actually have templates. I'll show you how those work. So when you start entering things in, it automatically enters the time. And then the last thing is your storyboard, which I didn't use Game of Thrones pictures, just shapes. But the idea is you can throw in all of your screens, and then you can kind of just shift them around and move them around as you want. Now, I'm not going to take credit for the portal sorting. Has anyone seen the portal sorting before, and has anyone used it? Matt Petrowski, who I thought was supposed to be here, and I have not seen him, shared this with me. So I was actually really excited to learn how to use this. But the idea is that you put it all in there, and you can kind of look at the flow and how the users would use it. And I also have templates in here where you can go in and say, long script, that's going to take me 2 hours, and you can put in whatever you want in the template, and then those are the values that you use in your modules. And you just pick them, and then the time just enters, and then you go back to your project, and you look and you see, okay, so far I'm under, under their budget. So that is shared with you guys. You can do whatever you want with it. And hopefully that helps you in breaking estimates apart and seeing what it would cost. So what time do we have here? Are we doing okay? We're doing okay. Okay, I talked quicker than I did yesterday when I practiced. Okay, so get back on the slides. So I do have an estimating exercise, but I think what I want to do before we do the exercise is see if anybody has questions, because I think those are more important than the exercise. And if you don't, then I'll give you the exercise, and we'll see how you guys do on that. We do have a microphone here, and I'm deaf, so I need you to speak in the microphone anyway. So if you have a question, please come up, and I'll do the best to answer your question.
So Deborah, when you approach a new client and you're meet and greet and you get to a point where you're doing estimating, At what point do you turn on the clock and start charging? Because your estimates are obviously very detailed.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, good question. When I sit down with the client, like I said, most clients, they just want to know. You know, I'm the same way. I'm a horrible person for any salesperson, because it's just like, just give me an idea. You know, don't go into the spiel. I don't need that. Most people just want to know, is this even within my budget? So what I typically do is I kind of think about it on a grand scale, and I kind of do all of that, but in my head, and I come up with a ballpark. So then once the client says, okay, that's within, then I tell them up front that the first thing we're going to do is a storyboard. Here's why the storyboard is useful to you and useful to me, and also that it's going to be able to allow me to do a detailed estimate, so that I don't have to come to you and say, well, it's going to be between X and X. I can come to you and say, it's going to be more like this. And once I know that it's going to cost X amount, then I can think about, how long is that going to take me? How many hours per week can I invest on this project? And how many hours did I say it was going to take? And so then I can tell them, we'll have this done in 10 weeks or whatever. And so that goes well every time with the client, because they realize they're going to have more concrete information.
follow-up question. So you picture in your head this is going to be from $10,000 to $15,000. But you need to do a storyboard and all of this detailed information gathering. Do you charge a certain amount up front for that portion of it?
That's a very good question. Everybody does it differently. There are seasoned developers in this room, and they're here refreshing their minds, or maybe supporting me. Either way, thank you. Some people have a flat fee. They think, I don't want a project with someone who's not willing to pay me $5,000 for a storyboard. But I don't do that. For me, it's based on, if it is just a $10,000 to $15,000, it's going to be a much smaller storyboard than a $100,000 project. So I adjust based on that. So if they really only have $10,000 to $15,000 to work with, then my storyboard's not going to be as detailed. Well, the storyboard will still be detailed, but my estimate won't be broken out as much, because since I've been doing it for so many years, I don't have to break it out as much on a smaller project. If you're new to this, you may still have to do that. But the idea is, if the project's not that much, then you can probably get away with just a couple thousand of that going towards the storyboard. So it really depends on how big the project is. You're not going to invest as much time on a smaller project as you would a larger project. Any other questions? I mean, it's kind of basic, right? So, okay. Yep, absolutely.
So is your sales process...
Can you, I honestly cannot
All
hear
right.
you. I
Is
have too many concerts in my
now?
younger days.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is your sales process basically 2 steps? So what I mean by that is that, are you actually selling, is the initial sale actually to sell the storyboard or to sell that discovery exercise that will lead to actually the full project? So are you actually pitching a value proposition for having a storyboard to begin with? Because guess what, you can actually take this away and do something else with it, or we're going to identify some process improvements that you can implement if you don't go forward with the project. I mean, is that what you're thinking when you're initially meeting your prospect?
Me, no. Other people, yes. So other people will say, I'm going to just charge X amount, and then if they want to take the storyboard somewhere, they can and have somebody else build it. For me, no. When I go in, I'm dedicated to that client, and for me, it's kind of the whole package. I'm the right person for this job, and I know I can help you, and here's why. And part of my process is doing the storyboard. So, because I want to make sure that I'm on the same page as the client, and I want to make sure that I do the project well for them. Follow-up question.
It's only, I know reason I ask, because sometimes it's a bit of a chicken and egg. Because I'll say, well, which one comes first in terms of working out how much it costs, or how much it's likely to cost?
Right.
And And sometimes it's, the question comes back in regards to, well, why do we have to pay for you to, in effect, think about how you're going to design it? And then I have to often come back and say, well, you can actually just walk away with this in any case, potentially. Like I know that I've actually got discovery documents from other people, myself, and
Yeah.
said, well, what can you do with this? So obviously they've done a lot of legwork
Right.
in storyboarding for somebody else. And then they've gone shopping around with that storyboard. So you obviously don't explain that at all. You actually just go for the full project.
That's what I do. That's what I typically do. And I'd say that most of the projects that I've pitched, I've gotten. And if I haven't gotten them, I think it had more to do with the fact that they wanted $10,000 worth of work in 2. But I don't know for sure. I mean, maybe they went and worked with someone else. But most people make that decision before I do the storyboard. So I don't think I've ever done a story. I've never done a storyboard where I haven't actually done the work as well. But again, this is what you're comfortable with, and like you said, you've gotten other storyboards, and there are some people that they'll take $5,000 for a storyboard, and they're not necessarily, maybe they have enough work and they don't, if they get the project, okay, and if they don't, they don't. I just think our community, somebody said it yesterday at the luncheon, that we're not competitors really. We're here to help each other. That's kind of how I've always felt in this community. And so, so for some people, maybe they just feel like that's okay if they walk away with the storyboard. For me, I want the project. So the storyboard to me is part of the project, but that's just me personally. Anything else? Okay, and I think we'll have more time. 10 minutes, right? 10 minutes? Okay. Okay, so the estimating exercise I'm going to do, and for those of you who've been in the business forever, you could probably figure this out in your head, because I just did I'm basically going to do phase 1 of that health insurance client, because when I sat down with them, we talked about all the phases that they wanted to do, but because they didn't know FileMaker, and it's just a mom and pop business, and it was new. Their business was new to them too, so they just didn't want to invest a whole lot of time and money until they knew that it was going to go well. So if you see me around, you can, and if you want to do this exercise and you see me around, you want to tell me how many hours you came up with, great. Otherwise, if you don't want to work on it here, because you want to go to the lazy river, I completely understand that. You can email it to me, Debbie@deborahzempel.com after the conference. Just please, 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 in the subject line, put DevCon estimating exercise, or I may not get it. So, so this is a health insurance company. We were going to do a storyboard for them, and I was creating a brand new interface for them, a new theme. And the parts of the project where we did a dashboard, where we had some metrics on the dashboard. We had a company table, an employees table, and a checklist. And we had a checklist template. So the idea is that when they're onboarding a company for health insurance, there are 100 things that they have to do, and they have to do them some things they have to do in a certain order. And some of them are just to run their business well, and some of them were government required things to do. So we built a little template for them so they could put in all their to-dos, and then when they created the company, that checklist came in, and then they can massage that checklist however they wanted. This is a small biz, not a large biz, so I don't need to worry about this, this, and this, and they can delete it or whatever they wanted to do. Or this particular client asked me to do something additional so they could add it to the checklist. And then they wanted a claims module. So you go to the doctor, you send in your claim. They actually had to put in the provider information, they have to put in every individual thing that happens at the doctor with a special health insurance code, and then decide whether it was approved or denied, and then send out an approval or a declination letter. And it wasn't also just what the insurance, what stuff is covered under insurance and what stuff wasn't. It was, let's say their plan allowed, two visits to the dentist every year, and if they went a third time, so it had to track how many times they went within that year. We did do migration from Excel, and the data was messy, as I had explained. They were an all Mac shop, so I didn't have to do anything but Mac. We did the installation for them, and we also did pretty extensive training because they just didn't know what FileMaker was. So I actually sat with them for a couple of days, just kind of showing them basics of FileMaker and stuff like that. So that was basically our phase one. You guys can figure that out if you want to, or like I said, some of you probably already have in your head what you think it would cost, and then just let me know. But any other questions? Anybody want to share their estimating experiences? How many of you actually estimate for your company? And how many of you say that you're pretty close, like your projects come in pretty close? So, well, yeah, I mean, I would still go to a session on estimating because maybe somebody has a trick that I haven't been using. So, why are you here? No, I'm just kidding. So did you have a question? Or an experience to share?
Well, I did have a question, and but now I don't remember it.
Oh, sorry.
Just give me a second here. When you're presenting an estimate to a client, how do you deal with the client saying, I need this by, 30 days, and your estimate is like, I can do this in 6 months?
Mm-hmm. That's actually a really good question, and what's really interesting about that question is I was asked the same thing when I spoke 10 years ago. You have a few options. You have to decide, can I put more people on it and get it done for them? If you want the job and they really need it in 30 days or 60 days, you have to decide if you can get it done. And if you can't, then if nothing else, you have to be realistic with your clients. Now, a lot of times, a client is just anxious and they want it. And if you say, well, I don't know if I'll be able to get it in 60 days, but I might be able to get it in 90. A lot of times they're like, oh, okay, that's fine, But then just be aware that by 90 days, they're going to be chomping at the bit. But I actually was asked last time, I work for a company where they don't give us time to do the storyboard. You have to decide, okay, 5 minutes off. You have to decide if that project is worth it to you. Are you going to be able to handle that pressure in getting it done in time? If you do that, do you have other clients that you're going to make unhappy? So it's kind of a balancing. If you're your own individual shop, you're not a big company that has a bunch of employees where you can say, well, I'll just throw these guys on it today or whatever, then you have to decide how you want to handle that. There are reasons why some people have to have it done in a certain amount of time. And I did get a project with a very good reason why they had to have it done in a certain time. And I just told myself I just got to do it. And I did.
Well, the follow-up to that is that when you get a deliverable to the client and then they need to go through and review it in a timely basis so that you can make changes and get it back to them.
Yep.
And then they don't respond in time. That's the
Yep.
other issue.
That's where your contract comes in handy. Because so the storyboard is just your blueprint, but the contract, those are all the words that say, I will get this done in X amount of days as long as, you're not a problem. In other words. But yes, that's where your contract comes in. So, and typically that's the case. Typically the client doesn't look at it. You know, everybody's in a rush to then wait. That happens a lot. And so projects tend to go longer than you initially anticipate, but it's usually because of that, and then because they know it was them, it's okay. If it's, you don't want it to be you, but yes, so that's where the contract comes in handy.
Sorry, I got another question. I was just
That's okay.
do you have, so how do you handle variations and like mid-project changes? So what I mean by that is, you know, somebody comes along mid-project, they say, actually, do you know what? Now that we've seen, we know the project's not finished, but now that we've actually, we've had a, let's say a stage 1 demonstration of where you're at. You know, we haven't filled the data in just yet, but we know where we're at, we know what you can do. Can you actually do this as well? So do you, how complicated do you make that change variation in your process? Do you literally do another storyboard, or do you literally just say, hey, do you know what, you just want a few tables and layouts, and this will just take this and that, and it'll just be this much? And do you sign that off, or how do you manage that process?
And the answer to that is it varies. So a lot of times it depends on how, if somebody comes to me and says, oh wow, we have this variation, and it's like a whole other module that might have some complexity to it, I might do another storyboard. But most of the time it's not so big that you have to do a storyboard. And then sometimes it's, you think, and it's only a couple hours, and because you've already started working on the project, you see that how you are, maybe you've got some buffer because you're moving quicker than you thought you would. Then it's like, oh yeah, we can do that. That's no problem. But if you get a situation where someone says, oh, I need to do this, and it's like 10, 15 hours additional, and you think that might change the budget, then I immediately say that. I said, we can absolutely do that for you. It's probably going to add, 10 or 15 hours to your budget. So if you don't have that, we could replace something else, and then the client can decide how they want to handle that. But I also have that in my contract. I also say that this is going to be, this is an estimate, and that could change as we start working on the system. That could change, and if it does, for the worse, I'm going to let you know long before we ever get to. I'm not going to come back to you and say, oh yeah, we're going to bill you 30 extra hours. I'll let you know ahead of time. So, but typically what I tell people is I try to come in under, so I never have to come back to you for more. And if I think it is going to be more, I'm going to let you know that right away.
Thanks, Debbie, for doing this.
Sure.
A couple of things that we've done to help that exact process is that we give, when we do hourly billing, we give the clients a budget to actual report. So that way they can see exactly where they are based on the feature sets that we've put into the system. And I give that to them so they can start managing us. Because if you look at the whole budget in totality, it looks great until you get to the last 10%. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, I got 80% of the project life and only 10% of the budget. So that last 10% is always the hardest part, I think, in any project, is to getting over that hump, getting through the testing, getting back feedback, and doing all that stuff. So that part, so they know exactly where they are at any given point when you're providing this report on a weekly basis or a couple weeks. It goes with like invoices, basically.
Right. Yeah, I like to give detailed invoices so people know what I'm working on. I don't just theme 3 hours or whatever.
I just wanted to make a quick tool recommendation for people who estimate projects on FileMaker Go. There's a iOS prototyping tool called Marvel. If you look for it on the App Store, it's Marvel.
Spell that for me.
M-A-R-V-E-L.
Oh, okay.
Search for Marvel Prototyping. And the company is Marvel Prototyping Ltd. And what you do is you just, sketch out your stuff on index cards or what have you, take pictures of it, and then you can put hot buttons over those and actually play it on your phone or your iPad. It's nice.
Excellent, thank you. darn it, storyboarding and estimating is just not that exciting, you know, and I'm like, I don't know how to juggle. So I just, you know, hopefully I kept y'all awake. And
Hi, I just wanted to quickly share what I've been doing with estimating recently. I've started mind mapping all the modules that are going to make up the project, and then I take everything from there. So I look at how many layouts I think it's going to be, how many tables, fields, etc. within that, and then I put that into Excel and then start calculating out the time that I think it's going to take. It's very similar to what you're doing in FileMaker. I'm doing that in Excel because I've not had the time to actually build a FileMaker system to do that for me. And so
now you do.
that's what I'm doing. Yeah. So, but thank you. That's really reinforced what I've been doing recently. And I came along to your session in 2007. And so
You
it's
did?
Yep.
High five. Sorry, I don't recognize your face.
So,
I was probably
yeah.
way more nervous then than I am now.
I've got grey hair now, so.
We all do.
But thank you.
I just
It's been
color
very
mine.
good.
Thank you. So, was this better? I mean, was it a little different, or was it like same old, same old?
What you showed originally with the prototype, I remember seeing that. So with the 3 buttons
Remember
on the-
seeing that one?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I was trying to, you know, change it up a bit, but it's my process is pretty much the same. So there you have it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I think I'm supposed to say everything's updated up on the website. So what you saw here is what you're going to get there. And you're supposed to do evaluations. Please do those if you have only nice things to say. No, just kidding.